Hey guys, Wolfie here and welcome back to the channel. As always, the usual disclaimer. Any opinion here is mine and mine alone. This is RWBY Volume 9, Chapter 4. Now, I'm going to be doing this in two separate videos because there's a lot of stuff I've caught here. I've already saw it twice due to me being a premium member. And I want to make sure that, once I see, do yet another viewing, I've already seen this twice. And I want to see it a third time so that way I can catch on to some lines more closely. Because for this particular chapter in Volume 9, it's almost at the halfway point. However, there are certain lines you have to listen to more than once. That's the first major spoiler is that you have to learn to listen to certain lines very carefully. Otherwise, you're going to be missing certain pieces where it's you may think it's saying this, but it's really saying that. And this is one of those episodes, chapters, whatever you want to call it. It's written by Miles this time around. So it looks like, I'm going to go into certain things, aspects of it before I really get into the meat and potatoes. So, and like I said, I'm going to be filming two videos, but it's going to be condensed together as to one because I have an app on my phone where it's I could record the two videos separately, but it's I could do the app and condense it into one. So, for this particular, chapter, it is back to around the length of Volume 9, Chapters 1 and 2, which is about 16, 17 minutes. In this case, for Chapter 4, it's about 16, 17 minutes, if you exclude both the intro and the ending credits. But like I said, there's a lot to dissect here, quote-unquote, and it's necessary because it's you really have to pay close attention to what's being said. And the first thing is the length of this particular chapter, it is close to those in chapters 1 and 2. Now, as I said before, it looks like it is confirmed from Rooster Teeth that the name of Volume 9, Chapter 4 is A Cat Most Curious. Hopefully, we'll find something out within the coming days. That's just me. Now, with for this particular chapter, so in sense of their normal size is supposed to their size we've been seeing, Weiss, Yang, and Blake are still tiny. So that means it's certain aspects of them to get back to normal. That part has yet to be resolved. Now, another thing I want to point out here, the reason why I'm doing two videos for this particular chapter is because, like I said, there's a lot to uncover, but I almost want to remind everybody I am using an app where the amount of time it says per clip, it's about 35 minutes. So it's this is one of those where it's I'm going to be doing a lot of digging. And I don't know if I could get everything I want to say within 35 minutes. So it's to play it safe, I may cut it off at the 30-minute mark or 25-minute mark. And then I start again going into the rest of it. So, but like I said, we do know that Weiss, Yang, and Blake, they're all still in their shorter sizes. And, like I said, they're still, so they finally we are finally introduced to Curious Cat, proper, because the end of Chapter 3, we do see that. But the start of Chapter 4, we finally get a proper introduction to Curious Cat. And what we have noticed here is that, with Blake and Yang, they're both, very, gung-ho, hey, really positive about it. Weiss, it's the jury is still out as whether she's still being serious or she's being her own version of being jolly with Yang and Blake. And the reason why I say the jury is still out is because, with the way Weiss says things, it's you really simply cannot tell. And for somebody like that, it's just are they serious? Are they joking? It's there's got to be some clear as day context. But that could be to the opinion of some. However, Weiss started showing a little bit of her sense of humor around the Curious Cat. And the thing is with Yang actually caught on to Weiss's sense of humor. Just she sounded really serious, but Yang caught on to the sarcastic, humorous intentions behind what she said when she roasted the Curious Cat. And Weiss was thank you. So Curious Cat inquires about so much with Remnant, Ciel. Who we haven't seen since Volume 3. Curious Cat, I'm going to call him CC in this particular video. So CC inquires about Sam. He inquires about a lot, and he actually got some selfies on RWBY's scroll. So there's a lot of stuff. So that's that part of it. You know, he does what he can to lead the team to where they need to go in order to get like the other three, Weiss, Blake, and Yang, back to their regular size. However, I'm not so sure that's really going to happen until it's closer to the end of the volume. That's just my personal opinion. So, the whole thing with the title, again, as of right now, it's 10:10 p.m. And like I said, it's available to premium members, but this won't be posted until next week. So it's like, it gives me a little more time to do, like, other stuff outside of this, that sort of thing. So, basically, you know, CC does whatever he could, you know, to help them get to where they need to be. And then the team eventually crossed paths with the herbalist. And that is another new character. Now, the whole thing with Curious Cat, I have a bit more, like, my notes on the side. And, like, varying hints, I'm starting to see, like, I wouldn't say more clear, but it's more like, was it something I missed for all this time, and now I'm starting to see it. But I'm not so sure if I'm going to get into it in this half or in the other half. So that's that. I'm looking at my notes, so please do bear with me. I gotta check time real quick. Okay, so looks like I'm doing a little quicker on time than I anticipated, but don't worry, I'm gonna be digging in through my notes, so please bear with me. So it looks like according to some of the other stuff here, is just that it looks like when they get the team as well as Little get to the herbalist, I do feel this is the start of RWBY's second trial by fire. Now, for those of you who may have forgotten, the first trial by fire was in volume 6 with her powers with the silver eyes. Because it's like you can't really rely on it to, like, solve everything. Sometimes you have to hold back until the time is right. So that was the first trial by fire, in my personal opinion. Now, the second trial by fire, and this is a bit more of an important one. Who are you? What is your identity? What are you supposed to be? Are you really supposed to be this? Are you really supposed to be that? And this is something where the fact that they, like, went for it and say, hey, let's start RWBY's second trial by fire a little bit early. It's a bit of a bold move, and if I had to be completely honest with you, it's not a bad thing, in a sense. Because, if you remember back it's around this time in volume 6, was when RWBY's first trial by fire began. So it's like, the timing is actually not bad, because it's like, you have to start certain aspects of it at a certain time. And for this to come out on schedule, if you look at when the first trial by fire began, it's actually not a bad move by the writers on the show. Not a bad move. However, when it comes to executing things like this, and this is coming from somebody who writes fan fiction, although my main thing is for another fandom, it's like, it has to be consistent with everything that's going on in the story. Because as soon as you pull certain things and it's not consistent to what's going on, like, in the overall story, it's not going to make any sense. In addition, this is one of those things where it's like, it could lead to a Team RWBY that's going to get split up once again. And again, this is not only the second trial by fire, in the sense of what I feel is starting, I'm also seeing other signs of Team RWBY splitting up once again. Because And the spoiler here, Weiss, Blake, and Yang were all saying, hey, the past is the past. We gotta move forward. And this is who I am. I am a huntress. RWBY was the only one who did not say that. RWBY is still unsure. But something tells me there's more to RWBY's response than her being unsure. There's more to it, and I think the rest of the team is playing a role in it, and they're not realizing it. And it comes down to, when I've said this a couple of times at the very least, one of the biggest issues this team has had, and that is consistent communication. Because I had to, when it comes to like the whole thing with Weiss, Blake, and Yang, I had to really listen to certain aspects of it very carefully. And this is where, again, where I mentioned at the beginning of this portion, it's like you really have to pay close attention. So it's like the whole part starts off, it's like Yang, she calls out RWBY and Blake, but she does not mention Weiss, which I feel further supports the unresolved tensions between Weiss and Yang. And oddly enough, we kind of see it in a sense since Volume 5. A little bit more so, and it's kind of subtle in Volume 6. There's a lot of unresolved tension, and it's pretty damn sad. And there's another hint, bizarrely enough, in Volume 8. So it's like, I do think we're going to be seeing some unresolved tensions within the team, and part of it is Yang and Weiss, and unfortunately it's going to affect RWBY even more so. So it's one of those things, it's like, I think the team really needs to have a good long talk about things, because you're looking at a team that's simply falling apart, and not for the reasons that they want it to be. So outside of all that, I'm looking at some of my notes. I'm going to be referring to my notes in the second half, so that way, if I run out of time on this initial recording, I could go refer to the notes again in the second part. So, like I said, I do feel there are some tensions between Yang and Weiss that have been unresolved, and I do think this is the volume that brings that up to attention. And again, it's going to affect RWBY, and it's also affect the chances of Bumblebee becoming and or remaining canon. And I don't think it's going to end well on any regards. So, and the whole thing with this particular trial by fire, it's not just RWBY, but it's everybody else in the team. So some people are mentioning, the whole thing with RWBY, it's like, the teammates are going to lift her up. I don't think that's the case. I honestly don't think that's the case. It's because I mentioned this before, not just on Twitter, but in recent videos, is that if you look at the direction the team is facing, you have Blake and Yang looking at each other, with Weiss and RWBY facing the viewer. And if you look at the end of the intro to Volume 6, you see that Yang and Blake are on opposite sides, while RWBY and Weiss rise up together. So, if anybody's probably going to be lifting RWBY up here in this regard to help her with the trial by fire, it's Weiss. Because Weiss, and this is going to go into the Team RWBY split hints, and I'm going to refer to that as the actual hint, and where the hints have been coming. So that's on that. So I'm going to go into the whole thing with Blake. The whole thing with Blake, looking at her past self. Now, I actually had to listen to this one extremely carefully, because there's a part where past Blake, you would think she brought up Weiss's name. However, if you listen to it very carefully, it's like, why face that struggle? Instead of Weiss faced that struggle. So it's one of those things, it's one of those lines where you have to really pay attention. And it's one of those things where it's not so much about Weiss, but it's more so why face that struggle. Now, with Ruby's whole thing, she mentioned her past self mentioning an invincible monster that took her mother, which would suggest that we now know what happened to Summer. So it looks like some type of monster that took Summer. We know it's a monster. Now, I do think there's some White Knight hint in that. For those of you who are familiar with fan fiction, that's Weiss and Jean. And the reason why I mentioned this is because, Weiss was talking about the Rusted Knight. So it's like, Weiss was like a big time skeptic in the first few chapters. I think she's becoming more of a believer, but in her own way. And she referred to the Rusted Knight as handsome. So it's one of those things that I wouldn't be surprised if she's coming around for Jean. And this kind of comes up as a possible indication that might be another pairing that could become canon. It could give Bumblebee a run for the money in a sense, because varying aspects of hints for Jean and Weiss might have come around since Volume 1. But again, I don't know if that's the case, but I do feel there are some hints that are going in that direction. And for those of you who are wondering, like I said, I am not saying who I ship in the show. But the only hint I'm going to say, it's definitely not Weiss and Jean. But I will mention that ship in the sense of like, there may have been some very subtle hints since Volume 1. But as the saying goes, time will tell. Now, once I get, done with like certain aspects of this here, because the second half is mainly just opinions on all this stuff. So it's like, that's it. And then, like I said, it's a lot for me to like dissect here. So bear with me. Now, the whole thing with Curious Cat, I do feel this is a version of Oz, because Oz's name in his varying forms have come up, with Ozma, Ozpin, for example, even Oscar. And part of me thinks Neil is Alex. But again, we really don't know what's going on. And, now, let me see here. So, and one other thing I want to mention here, the herbalist, I do feel that conversation he had with the team is exposing a lot of Team RWBY's weaknesses as well as their issues. And it's about, when it comes to certain aspects, it's about better understanding the present time, that sort of thing. Now, I'm going to check my time really quickly. I'm going to pause the video because I do need some water. Okay, so I am back. I actually had to get some water into my system, so I don't really sound scratchy, so I do apologize. Now, the fact that Curious Cat is not only asking about all this stuff, but it's like also like trying to help the team out in his own way. It's like, is the Curious Cat Oz? And furthermore, again, the question remains, is Neo Alex? Are there issues with Yang and Weiss? Are there even hints of White Knight becoming canon? And with Ruby, it's like she seems to be more and more down. And I think, I'm not so sure who it is. I have to watch this one more time. I wouldn't be surprised if it's Yang. I think Yang might start feeling that the team may be splitting up. And that Blake is like echoing those sentiments by thinking we need to, resolve certain issues first before we get to other things like back to Remnant, all that stuff. Because you have to remember, Ruby is still without Crescent's Rose. We have no idea where that weapon is. And something tells me that, if Volume 9 ends and she does not have Crescent Rose back, I wouldn't be surprised, if that's part of her second trial by fire. So it's like, and in all honesty, it's just like, there's a lot of questions Yes, Sandy has to make his presence known. He wants to say hi. I would try not to look at Sandy's booty. But anyway, it's one of those things where it's like, I think Volume 9, depending on how that ends, I think we may be having a lot more questions than answers. And what's a little bit interesting is like whether or not we are going to see an animation team for Volume 10 if Volume 10 gets the green light. So, let's see here. I'm going to check time. I can't really see what I'm doing. Okay, so I'm going to cut this off. I'm going to cut this part off here so that way I can get some more water in my system, and that way I come back in the second part with my opinions. So I'll be back. Okay, so I am back. Now this is a completely different recording, and as I said, this is going to be a 2-into-1, meaning that the first half is just like pretty much a lot of stuff what I think, is going on and what's actually being seen. And I don't want too much sandy hairs in my face, so forgive me. So there's a lot of stuff, what I think is about to go down as well as what's happening. And now this half is very much just my opinion on a lot of stuff because, again, this is one of those chapters where, and this being Volume 9, Chapter 4, is where you really have to pay attention to the lines that's being said. Because you may be thinking it's one thing, it's probably not going to be what you think it is. So, to really start this portion of the whole thing off, again, this is Volume 9, Chapter number 4. So, what do I think about all of this? So, for Volume 9, Chapter 4, it's just like, my personal thing is that the attempt to consolidate so much into a chapter that's less than 20 minutes long and more like 16, 17 minutes, it's just like it leaves a decent deal to be desired. This is the mistake from Volume 9, Chapter 1 and Volume 9, Chapter 2, in my personal opinion. Volume 9, Chapter 3, it's like it's a little bit longer, but it's like, I'm trying to think, make some sense out of certain things. And in all honesty, it's just like, I don't think Volume 9 is as great of a volume as some people may think it is. And another thing is that with Volume 9 so far leaving a decent deal to be desired, especially Chapter 4 here, even though the thing with this particular chapter is that you're trying to put too much into it, when it really shouldn't be the case. And the whole thing with Weiss, Blake, and Yang, it's like trying to incorporate the second trial by fire by using the entire team as opposed to just one person. It's like you're trying to, I think this is trying a bit too much. Because if you look at Chapter 3, in this particular chapter, it's like there's no Bumblebee stuff really going on. And it's like the tones, it's like, I don't know if Bumblebee is ever going to happen. If it does, it won't remain canon, as I have mentioned before. But that's a completely separate video and other stuff that goes with that video. Now, with RWBY, in the sense of like her quote-unquote trial, like I said, I do feel that this is the start of her second trial by fire. And that the ending of this particular trial by fire probably won't finish until the end of the volume itself, which is a month and a half from now. Oh, damn. I had to apologize for that. I think something is causing my nose to really itch. Or I wouldn't say really itch, but itch slightly. Now, again, the whole thing with White Knight, the hints are starting to show up there. It's just like, I would not be at all surprised either way, and by either way, if Blake and Yang become canon or if Jean and Weiss become canon. Because when it comes to those two, like, some people tend to argue, which one actually has the most proof of the signs coming along for the beginning, the slow burn. Both of them fall under the category of a metaphorical slow burn. And the varying interactions here and there. With that being said, it comes down to individual interpretation of the information given. Now, I'm actually going to be looking at my time here and there. Hopefully this part's more than 10 minutes, so that way it's all peachy. So, what I'm going to try to do once I'm done with this, filming this part, I'm going to try to, do it where it's like, I can have both of them together. But who really knows at this point, because I'm not the world's best at editing stuff, so bear with me. So, I do feel that there are varying tensions between Yang and Weiss that have yet to be resolved. And some of that does come back to volume 5, like I said, which I'm probably going to get to certain aspects of this in greater detail in a different video. But I do feel that volume 5 is where the tensions between Yang and Weiss surprisingly show up. They have yet to be resolved. Now, I do feel there are certain types of tensions between Blake and Weiss still, since volume 6, but I don't think it's as relevant as Yang's tension with Weiss that has yet to be resolved. But still. And I do know that with Weiss, it's like, Weiss is pretty much cheering RWBY on. And unfortunately, with this particular chapter, it's like, I do think it's a matter of time before the tensions between Yang and Weiss come up, and that's sort of thing that's got to be talked out. Even though we've seen in chapter 2, Weiss had a feeling that Blake and Yang are together. Because she did say in chapter 2, it's like, it's about time. Although, the biggest flaw in that is that RWBY's not paying attention. Which is we see a repeat of in this chapter, chapter 4. RWBY's not paying attention to varying things. And it is one of those things where I do feel RWBY's got to work on in order to improve herself as a person and herself as a huntress. And I do feel that this is a further catalyst in Bumblebee, that's Blake and Yang, either being one-sided, or if they do become canon, they won't remain canon. And there is a difference, clear as day, between becoming canon and remaining canon. Meaning that if you become canon and nothing else happens, it's open-ended. You could do whatever you want. However, if you look at something that becomes canon and remains canon, and the best example of a couple that became canon on their respective source and remained canon comes from a video game known as Final Fantasy IV, that trilogy, Cecil and Rosa. They became canon and they remained canon. So it's one of those things, it's like, if there's something that the writers really need to work on in that regard, it's like, whoever becomes canon, they have to work on making sure they remain canon. And based on what we're seeing here in the show thus far, if Bumblebee does become canon, they will not remain canon. Meaning that they will become open-ended. Especially when we have Volume 10 that we have a script that's being in the works, but it's not being given the green light yet. And that is what's going to hurt them a lot. And by them, Blake and Yang. And there are people on social media who are being somewhat into the realm of blindly accepting things without looking at how things are being written, the execution of the ship. Because anybody who writes fan fiction or writes books or writes stories for other mediums or medias, they will all tell you have to execute things in a way where it is consistent, people can follow along, and they know what's going to become canon, what doesn't, because it's executed in a consistent manner. With chapter 4 here, it's showing the inconsistency of the writing. And this is where the writers of the show really need to take a step back, look at why they've gotten so inconsistent, and work on making things consistent. Because there are people who will never accept Blake and Yank becoming a couple because of the way the ship is being executed on the show. Meaning that you can have awesome animation, you can have an awesome script, but if it's not executed in a consistent manner, easy to understand, that means nothing. And that is something that some parts of the RWBY fandom need to accept. Meaning that you can question the things you support. And if you question the things you support, it's like you get to know things in a better light. That way you get to see the criticism being as valid as they are. And the whole scene with Blake, Yang, and Weiss, where it's like they're questioning, they're chatting with their past self, it's like they're refusing to go back to the past. They're wanting to keep on moving forward because they know what has to be done. Whereas RWBY is just like, she doesn't know what to do. But when it comes down to it, who's going to be lifting her up? And I think the most likely person that's going to lift her up is going to be Weiss. Because Weiss has done it before. She's helped RWBY in a very major way in Volume 6. And it's like, when it comes to the vision of certain things, it's like, Weiss is probably going to be the first one. And one of the reasons why I feel Weiss is going to be helping RWBY a great deal more for the rest of the volume is because of the fact that, if you remember Volume 1, Weiss just like, RWBY talked to Weiss, it's like, hey, I just want to let you know I can do this. Weiss says, you're fine, and then RWBY mutters underneath her breath, normal needs, which goes back to the very first, very beginning of RWBY, which I'm going to get into that when it comes, I talked about the RWBY split in a separate video. So, I'm okay, I'm doing pretty good on time, but like I said, I am dividing this up into 2 videos. So that way people understand where I'm coming from and all that stuff. So to recap everything, so I think what Miles tried to do with this particular chapter, he's trying to shove so much in, and I don't think it worked the way he intended. It's just too much in like such a short episode. It should have been a little bit longer, maybe 20-25 minutes, so that way things are better understood. Because it's like, I mean, there's too little. Like, in an episode, it's pretty bad as it is, but too much into a short episode is just as bad in its own way. And that's something I wish the writers would, like, take note of. It's just like, if you want to do a chapter where it's like, you're trying to get so much into it, you want to make sure it's a long episode. So that way things are easily understood, if not better understood. And oddly enough, it's like I said, this volume so far, and I say this with chapter 4, I do feel this leaves a bit to be desired, because it's like, there's so much potential, but there are varying aspects of it, and the varying aspects being important ones, it's just like, it's either falling flat, or it's just like, trying to force so much into like, to where it's like people are getting confused as to what's going on. And I wish that really wasn't the case. But like I said, the whole thing with the Rusted Knight mentioning by Weiss, I won't be surprised if this gives a further hint of White Knight. And that is Weiss and Jean, for those who understand fan fiction. So if that becomes canon, I would not be surprised. Because I think when it comes to the premise of this show, from what I've been seeing, I think it's about breaking the cycle. meaning that correct the mistakes from the generations before you. And it's just like, I mean, it's one of those things like I do want to see the rest of this volume, but it's just like they really got to do something unbelievably special to make this a good volume. Because right now, for those who are premium members, it's one of those where it's like it's leaving a decent deal to be desired, and that really should not be the case. And with this chapter kind of being in the inconsistent realm of like what's going on, who's about to become canon, who is canon, so on and so forth, this is what's turning the RWBY fan base away. There are people who have been leaving since volume since volume 4. I mean, if they're not learning their lesson at this point, I don't know what's going to take. What it's going to take. But on that note, I should be putting some photos into my personal email so that way I could get started on the Team RWBY split project, and that way it's all smooth sailing for me in that regard. But like I said, next year is around this time is going to be I'm going to be revisiting this volume so that way I can look at it from Rooster Teeth's that website, their point of view. And I can just figure out, okay, is this really worth my time? Are my opinions really the same? That sort of thing. And then once we find out anything about volume 10, it's going to determine very other things from those who make content for RWBY as well as the fandom itself. So nothing at all surprises me anymore, but I will say this much, and that is, the writers have got to get it together in the sense of making things consistent. And they really have to start looking at the previous volumes, because inconsistency this entire time isn't going to help the cause. And those within the fandom being very accepting of something that's inconsistent, my advice to you is to read some fan fiction. Because some of the fan fiction for RWBY is done way better. I've read some fan fiction for RWBY. I write fan fiction myself for another fandom. And I can tell you, a lot of the fan fiction I've read, it's done way better. It's a lot more consistent. And it's just something that people who are blindly accepting things as they are really need to see. Because otherwise, it's going to be the same old song and dance. Making up excuses for inconsistent writing. Making up excuses for inconsistent writing. Making up excuses for things that are poorly executed. It's about time people need to stop being so blindly accepting of things. Start questioning things. Because in order for a show to get really good, it's like you have to question things. It's not difficult. And that's all I really have for this video. With Wolvie here, signing off. I will catch you all on the flip side.